John Lennon signed an album for the man who would return 6 hours later and shoot him 4 times. That is the sentence. That is the whole story in one breath. But it is also the smallest part of what happened on December 8, 1980, at the northwest corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West in Manhattan. My name is Blackwell. I spent 3 weeks inside the Chapman file in the basement of a records office that smelled like old paper and dust, and what I found there has stayed with me ever since. The notebook the shooter carried in his coat pocket that night contained a single line, circled 3 times in blue ink, the pen almost breaking through the paper. The line read, "I am not nobody." Not a threat, not a manifesto, a complaint. A man who felt invisible decided to borrow the brightest light on the planet by extinguishing it. And the worst part, the part the official record does not fully capture, is how visible he was in the months before. How many people saw him coming? How many did nothing? Mark David Chapman was born in Fort Worth, Texas in May of 1955. His father was an Air Force sergeant who, according to the court-ordered psychological evaluations I read in the file, beat his mother regularly through Mark's childhood. The boy who would later kneel on a sidewalk reading a paperback while his target bled out was, at the age of 10, already hearing voices. He called them his little people. He imagined himself a king, and the little people were his subjects. They applauded him. They obeyed him. For a child who felt powerless in his own house, the imaginary court was a small act of survival. But the voices did not leave when he grew up. They simply learned new names. He moved with his family to Decatur, Georgia in his teens. He was an awkward boy, tall and soft, with thick glasses that made his eyes look larger than they were. He took drugs. He ran away from home. He came back. At 14, he tried to run away to live on the streets of Miami. At 15, he found Jesus at a Presbyterian rally and converted with a violence that startled his friends. He carried a Bible. He handed out pamphlets. He told anyone who would listen that he was saved. And for a while, according to the people who knew him then, he seemed steadier. He worked at a YMCA summer camp. The children loved him. He was good with them. The file contains photographs from those summers. Mark Chapman in a camp counselor t-shirt with a whistle around his neck, smiling, surrounded by children who are all smiling back. He looks, in those photographs, like someone who could have lived a normal life. He traveled. He went to Lebanon in the summer of 1975 on a mission trip. He went to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas later that year to work with Vietnamese refugees. He was good at it. He was praised for it. He returned home with letters of commendation. And then, slowly, between 1975 and 1979, the Bible in his hands began to share shelf space with another book, a paperback, worn at the spine, passages underlined in the same blue ink he would later use to circle the phrase, "I am not nobody." The book was The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, a novel about a 16-year-old boy named Holden Caulfield who walks through Manhattan for 3 days, appalled by the phoniness of the adult world, wishing he could save innocent children from growing up into it. Millions of teenagers have read that book and closed it and moved on with their lives. Mark Chapman did not close it. Mark Chapman began to believe he was Holden Caulfield. He began to see phonies everywhere. And the biggest phony of all, in the geometry of his growing delusion, was the man who had once stood in front of a microphone and said the Beatles were more popular than Jesus Christ. The man who had written Imagine, a song about a world with no possessions, and then lived in a 7-room apartment in the most exclusive building in New York City. The man whose face was on the cover of the album Chapman had just bought. In 1977, Chapman moved to Hawaii. He worked security at a condominium complex. He married a woman named Gloria Abe, a travel agent 4 years older than him, who had booked his trip. He seemed, on the outside, to be a man assembling a life. But the file contains letters from that period, long handwritten letters to friends and to strangers, in which he describes feeling like a failure, feeling invisible, feeling that he needed to do something that would make the world finally see him. In 1979, he attempted suicide by running a hose from his car's exhaust pipe into the cabin. The hose melted before the fumes reached him. He took it as a sign. He was being kept alive for a purpose. The purpose began to take shape in the autumn of 1980. He read an article about John Lennon in Esquire magazine. The article was not flattering. It described Lennon as a recluse, a house husband living on rich man's royalties, baking bread and walking his son to kindergarten. To Chapman, still clutching his paperback, this was the ultimate phoniness. This was Holden Caulfield's complaint made flesh. A man who had sung about having nothing, who in fact had everything. On a page in his notebook, Chapman wrote John Lennon's name, and beneath it the word phony. He flew from Honolulu to New York on December 6, 1980. He checked into the Sheraton Center on 7th Avenue. He spent 2 days wandering Manhattan. He stood across the street from the Dakota, the Renaissance-style apartment building on 72nd Street, and he watched. He saw a doorman, he saw tourists, he saw yellow cabs and the black limousines of the residents. He did not see John Lennon on the 6th. He did not see him on the 7th. On the morning of December 8th, he woke up, shaved, dressed, and walked to a bookstore on Broadway. He bought a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. On the first blank page inside, he wrote, "This is my statement." He signed it, Holden Caulfield. He took a cab back to the Dakota. He stood on the sidewalk for most of the day. At around 5 in the afternoon, Lennon and his wife, Yoko Ono, emerged from the building, heading to a recording session at the record plant. Lennon was carrying his new album, Double Fantasy, which had been released 3 weeks earlier. Chapman was holding a copy of that album and a pen. He stepped forward. He asked Lennon if he would sign it. Lennon signed it, wrote the date underneath his name, and looked up and asked Chapman, "Is that all you want?" An amateur photographer named Paul Gorish was standing nearby and took a photograph. The photograph exists. I have seen it. John Lennon, in a dark coat, leaning slightly forward to return the album. Mark Chapman, beside him, looking down at what is being handed back to him. His face is soft. He looks in that photograph like any fan. The file notes that in the 6 hours between that photograph and what happened next, Chapman did not leave. He stood in the cold outside the archway of the Dakota. He waited. At approximately 10:50 in the evening, a limousine pulled up to the 72nd Street curb. John and Yoko stepped out. Yoko went ahead through the archway toward the entrance. John walked a few steps behind her, carrying tapes from the session. Chapman stepped out of the shadow of the archway, called out, "Mr. Lennon." As Lennon turned, Chapman fired 4 times from a Charter Arms undercover .38 caliber revolver. He fired in a combat stance, both hands on the weapon, a stance he had been taught in his brief time as a security guard in Hawaii. The bullet struck Lennon in the back and shoulder. The doorman, Jose Perdomo, a Cuban immigrant who had seen many things in his life, shouted at Chapman, "Do you know what you've done?" Chapman said, "Yes." He dropped the gun. He took off his coat, folded it, placed it on the ground. He sat down on the curb. He picked up his paperback copy of The Catcher in the Rye. He began to read. That is how the first officers on the scene, from the 20th Precinct, found him. Reading. John Lennon was driven to Roosevelt Hospital in the back of a police car because no ambulance could arrive fast enough. He was pronounced dead at 11:15 in the evening on December 8, 1980. He was 40 years old. His son, Sean, was 5. The file contains Chapman's confession, which he gave that night to detectives. It is a strange document. He does not, in the transcript, seem angry. He seems disappointed that the thing is over. He seems relieved that he will now be known. At his sentencing in August of 1981, he refused to allow his lawyers to mount an insanity defense. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years to life. He remains, as of this recording, in Wendy Correctional Facility in upstate New York. He has been denied parole every time he has applied. At every hearing, he reads a statement. Every statement contains some version of the same phrase. I wanted to be somebody. I did not know any other way. The irony of Mark David Chapman is not that he got what he wanted. He did. His name is in every file, every book, every documentary about that night. The irony is that in becoming somebody, he remained exactly what he had always been, a footnote to another man's song. The sidewalk outside the Dakota is now a memorial called Strawberry Fields. Across the street in Purback, the one with the inscription, "This is my statement," signed Holden Caulfield, sits in an evidence locker in New York City. I held it, briefly, under supervision. The spine is worn. The pages are yellow. It weighs almost nothing. A man used it to convince himself that murder was literature, and a security guard became a song that will outlive every one of us because someone in Hawaii read a novel and decided he was its protagonist. Robert Bardo bought Rebecca Schaeffer's home address for $4. That is the sentence that every American law school now uses to explain why stalking became a crime. $4. The price of a sandwich. The price of a magazine. The price that, in 1989 in the state of California, a private detective would charge to walk into the Department of Motor Vehicles in Sacramento, present a driver's license, fill out a form, and walk out with the residential address of anyone registered to drive a car in the state. Anyone, including a 21-year-old actress who had just finished a television series and was, that summer, auditioning for the role of her life. The loophole was so wide that a 19-year-old fast food worker from Tucson, Arizona, who had never finished high school, used it successfully. He walked into an agency. He gave a name. He paid the fee. They gave him Sweetser Avenue. They gave him the exact apartment number. They gave him, effectively, permission to knock on her door. Rebecca Lucille Schaeffer was born in Eugene, Oregon, on November 6, 1967. Her father was a psychologist, her mother a children's book author. She was an only child. The file on her life before the shooting is thin because there was not much darkness in it. She modeled as a teenager. She moved to New York at 17 to sign with a talent agency. She was photogenic in a way that was not quite glamorous, a round face, dark eyes, an uncertain smile. She was cast in 1986 at age 18 as the younger sister on a CBS sitcom called My Sister Sam, opposite the actress Pam Dauber. The show ran for 2 seasons. It was not a hit, but it was enough to put Rebecca on the cover of teen magazines. It was enough that an awkward, overweight 19-year-old named Robert John Bardo, living in his parents' house in Tucson, sitting in front of a television, began to write her letters. Bardo's bedroom, when police searched it after the shooting, was a museum of the obsession. 30 videotapes of My Sister Sam episodes. Every magazine cover she had ever appeared on. Letters she had written back to him through her agent. The polite automatic responses that any celebrity staff member sends to fan mail. Bardo had kept each one. He had framed them. The file contains a photograph of his wall, and the wall is a grid of her face and his name written in her handwriting. The envelopes are postmarked 1987, 1988, 1989. He wrote to her every month. He thought, because she wrote back, that she knew him, that they had something. Bardo was, by any clinical definition, severely mentally ill. He had dropped out of school at 15. He had threatened his family. He had been hospitalized twice. At 19, he took a Greyhound bus from Tucson to Los Angeles, carrying a teddy bear and a bouquet of roses, intending to show up at the studio where My Sister Sam was filmed and meet Rebecca. Studio security, which was paying attention, turned him away. They noted his name. They noted the teddy bear. They photocopied his driver's license. They did not, because no law required them to, share this information with the young actress whose studio he had just tried to enter. He went back to Tucson. He went back to his videotapes. And then, in 1989, he did 2 things that would change American law forever. He saw Rebecca in a new film called Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, in which her character had a sex scene, and he hired a private investigator named Anthony Zinkis. Zincus was a licensed private detective in Tucson. He was not, legally, doing anything wrong when he took Bardo's $250 fee and agreed to find Rebecca Schaeffer's home address. The method he used was public record. California law at the time permitted anyone to obtain driving records and residential addresses from the Department of Motor Vehicles. Zincus filled out the form. The DMV processed it. The address came back. 2101 Sweetser Avenue, apartment 110, West Hollywood. For a fee of $4, the state of California handed a 19-year-old stalker the exact location of the woman he had watched on television for 3 years. On the morning of July 18, 1989, Rebecca Schaeffer was preparing for an audition. She was reading for the role of Michael Corleone's daughter in Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part 3. The script was on her kitchen table. She was 21 years old. She lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a U-shaped building on Sweetser Avenue, a street that runs north from Santa Monica Boulevard through a quiet residential corner of West Hollywood. The building had no doorman, no security camera. The front entrance was a locked glass door with an intercom. Visitors pressed a button. Residents buzzed them in. At 10:15 in the morning, the intercom rang. Rebecca pressed the button and asked who it was. A young man's voice said he was a fan. He had a package for her. She did not buzz him in. She came down herself, through the lobby, opened the door. She was wearing a black and white bathrobe. She had not yet dressed for the audition. She recognized him, later testimony would suggest, from a previous encounter nobody had ever told her about. Bardo had, in fact, come to her door a month earlier with flowers and a letter. She had politely told him to leave. She had asked him not to come back. That morning, July 18th, he came back. He handed her a manila envelope. Inside were letters. Inside was a photograph of him. Inside, he would later tell detectives, was everything he had wanted her to see. She took it. She said, "Thank you." She said, "Please don't come here again." She began to close the door, and Bardo, who had been carrying a .44 caliber Ruger revolver in a plastic grocery bag, pulled it out and shot her once in the chest at point-blank range. The bullet entered below her collarbone. She fell backward into the vestibule. She said, "Why? Why?" Those were her last recorded words. The neighbor across the hall heard the shot, came to her door, found Rebecca on the floor. Bardo was gone. He ran back to the Greyhound station. He boarded a bus back to Tucson. Rebecca Schaeffer was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 10:56 in the morning, less than 30 minutes after she had opened her door. She was 21 years old. The script for The Godfather Part 3 was still on her kitchen table. The role eventually went to Sofia Coppola. Bardo was arrested the next day in Tucson, walking in traffic, screaming her name. He confessed within hours. He told detectives he had killed her because she had become a whore when she filmed the sex scene in Scenes from the Class Struggle. He said he was punishing her for no longer being the innocent girl he had loved on television. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life without parole. He is incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. But the real aftermath of Rebecca Schaeffer's death was not the trial, it was the law. The state of California, facing public outrage over the fact that a murderer had legally purchased his victim's address from the government, passed in 1990 the first anti-stalking statute in the United States. Every other state in the country followed within 5 years. The federal government passed the Driver's Privacy Protection Act in 1994, closing the DMV loophole nationwide. Every anti-stalking law in America today traces back to a door on Sweetser Avenue and a young actress in a bathrobe who opened it because she was polite. The tragedy of Rebecca Schaeffer is that she became a statute. The irony is that the statute only exists because she did not live to see it written. Her name is inscribed in legal history as the reason a stranger can no longer, for $4, learn where you sleep. The woman who ran Selena's fan club was the one who pulled the trigger. That sentence, if you let it sit in the quiet for a moment, contains the entire architecture of the most devastating celebrity murder in Latin American history. Not a stranger. Not a stalker from a bus station. Not a drifter with a paperback. The killer was the president of the official fan club, the manager of 2 boutique stores, a woman who had been invited to family dinners, who had held birthday gifts for Selena's nieces, who wore a small silver ring that Selena herself had given her. Her name was Yolanda Saldivar. She was 34 years old. She was a former registered nurse from San Antonio, and she had spent the last 4 years turning herself into the most trusted person in the life of a 23-year-old singer who was about to become the biggest crossover star in the world. Selena Quintanilla Perez was born in Lake Jackson, Texas, on April 16, 1971. Her father, Abraham Quintanilla, had been a Tejano musician himself, playing in a band called Los Dinos in the 1950s, before the market for Mexican-American music in Texas dried up. When he heard his youngest daughter sing at age 6 in the kitchen of their house in Lake Jackson, he reformed the band around her. Selena y Los Dinos toured the Tejano circuit throughout the 1980s, weddings, quinceañeras, rodeo fairgrounds, the back rooms of restaurants. She was singing in Spanish. She did not, in her early years, actually speak Spanish fluently. Her brother A.B. wrote the songs and taught her the lyrics phonetically. By the time she was 15, she was the lead voice of a rising genre. By 18, she had signed with EMI Latin. By 22, she had won a Grammy. The Tejano music industry, which had been a regional curiosity, became, because of her, a national force. Yolanda Saldivar first met Selena in 1991 at a concert in San Antonio. Saldivar approached Abraham Quintanilla with a proposal. She wanted to start an official fan club. She was organized. She was persistent. She had worked as a nurse and knew how to manage paperwork. Abraham was skeptical, but eventually agreed. The fan club began with a handful of members. Within 2 years, under Saldivar's management, it had grown to 8,000 dues-paying subscribers. She collected the $22 annual memberships. She mailed out photographs and newsletters. She attended concerts. She became, gradually, indispensable. In 1994, when Selena opened 2 boutique stores called Selena Etc., one in Corpus Christi, one in San Antonio, it was Yolanda Saldivar she hired to manage them. The file on Yolanda Saldivar, which I read across 2 afternoons in a records facility in Corpus Christi, is the file of a woman who had been quietly assembling a parallel life. She had no children. She lived alone. She had been fired from previous nursing jobs for what supervisors described as controlling behavior with patients. She drove a red Ford pickup truck. She kept in her apartment dozens of framed photographs of Selena, arranged in a specific order by year. And, beginning in late 1994, she had begun to embezzle money from both the fan club and the boutiques. The amounts were not small. Over several months, she diverted more than $60,000. Fan club members began to complain to Abraham Quintanilla that they had paid dues but received nothing in return. Checks bounced. Inventory was missing. In March of 1995, Abraham confronted Saldivar in a meeting at the family's office. He showed her the evidence. He told her she was being removed from her positions. He told Selena not to trust her anymore. But Selena, who was generous in a way that would become the central irony of her death, did not want to cut Saldivar off completely. She felt bad for her. She believed that Yolanda had been useful to her for 4 years and that there might be an explanation. On the evening of March 30, 1995, Selena drove to the Days Inn Motel on Navigation Boulevard in Corpus Christi, where Yolanda was staying in room 158. Selena wanted to retrieve the financial records of the boutiques, which Yolanda was still holding. She also, according to later testimony, wanted to give Yolanda one last chance to explain. She went to the motel room. She was handed, by Yolanda, some of the documents. She left. But the full set of records was not there. Yolanda, through tears, said she had been raped in Mexico earlier that week and needed Selena to drive her to a hospital before she would hand over the rest. Selena agreed. She took her to Doctors Regional Hospital. She sat with her in the emergency room for 2 hours. The examination showed no evidence of assault, Selena drove her back to the motel. On the morning of March 31st, 1995, at around 11:30, Selena returned to room 158 to collect the final documents. She was alone. She was 23 years old. The meeting lasted about 10 minutes. Inside the room, according to Yolanda's later confession and the forensic reconstruction, the two women argued. Yolanda pulled out a .38 caliber Taurus revolver that she had purchased 2 weeks earlier. She pointed it at Selena. Selena turned and ran. She made it out of the room and into the motel parking lot. Yolanda fired once. The bullet struck Selena in the upper back, severing a major artery near her shoulder. She kept running. She ran into the motel lobby. She told the desk clerk the number was 158. Those were her last intelligible words. She collapsed. Paramedics arrived within minutes. She was transported to Memorial Medical Center. She was pronounced dead at 1:05 in the afternoon. She had lost more than half her blood. Yolanda Saldivar did not flee far. She locked herself in her red pickup truck in the motel parking lot. She held the revolver to her own head for 9.5 hours, while police negotiators, her father on speakerphone, and her priest all tried to talk her out. She told the negotiator repeatedly that she had not meant to shoot Selena, that the gun had gone off by accident, that she loved her. At around 9:30 that night, she surrendered. She was arrested, charged with first-degree murder, and held without bail. The trial began in October of 1995 in Houston. It lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 17 minutes. They convicted her. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She is held at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She became eligible for parole in March of 2025. The parole board denied her release. 40,000 people attended Selena's funeral in Corpus Christi. Her album, Dreaming of You, was released posthumously in July of 1995 and debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. It was the first predominantly Spanish-language album to ever do so. The crossover to English-language audiences, which she had been preparing her entire career to make, happened anyway, without her. A generation of Latinas grew up listening to a woman who had been dead their entire lives and who had become, in death, something she had never claimed to be while alive, a symbol. Her bronze statue stands on the seawall in Corpus Christi, facing the Gulf. Tourists leave white roses there every day. Her fan club, the one Yolanda Saldivar had built and then destroyed, was disbanded within weeks of the murder. The Days Inn was renamed and remodeled. Room 158 is now a different room with different furniture, rented to business travelers who usually do not know. The parking lot where she ran, still there, looks the same as it did. The irony of Selena's death is not that a stranger killed her, it is that she died trusting someone. She died because the woman who had promised to protect her legacy was, it turned out, the only person in the world close enough to end it. Andrew Cunanan had already killed 4 men before he reached Miami. That is the first thing you have to understand about the morning of July 15th, 1997. When Gianni Versace walked out of his Ocean Drive mansion to buy magazines at the News Cafe on the corner of 11th Street. The man who would kill him 6 minutes later on the front steps of Casa Casuarina was not an unknown. He was, at that moment, the 10th name on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. He had been on that list for 3 months. His face had been on the front page of every major newspaper in America. A 3-page spread in People magazine, a feature on America's Most Wanted. His name and photograph had been distributed to every police department in the continental United States. He had been hiding in plain sight in South Beach for 2 months, eating at the same restaurants Versace ate at, attending the same clubs, sleeping in a $400 a week room at a pay-by-the-week hotel 8 blocks from the mansion. And nobody had caught him. Andrew Philip Cunanan was born in National City, California on August 31st, 1969. His father, Modesto Cunanan, was a Filipino-American stockbroker. His mother, Marianne, was Italian-American. Andrew was the youngest of 4 children and the obvious favorite of his father, who bought him tailored suits as a teenager, paid for his private school, and gave him his own bedroom while the other siblings shared. In 1988, when Andrew was 18, his father was accused of embezzling money from his brokerage clients, fled to the Philippines to avoid prosecution, and left his family destitute. Andrew visited him once. His father, in a rural province outside Manila, was living in a shack. Andrew flew home. He told his mother that he was going to live a different kind of life. He moved to San Francisco. He reinvented himself. The reinventions were the pattern of his life. He told people he was a naval officer. He told others he owned factories in Mexico. He claimed to be Jewish. He claimed to be the son of an Israeli diplomat. He dated wealthy older men in the gay community of San Francisco and La Jolla, taking allowances and gifts in exchange for companionship. He was, by all accounts, brilliant, charming, a gifted mimic, a voracious reader who could discuss opera and architecture with equal fluency. He was also, the file makes clear, pathologically incapable of telling the truth about anything. By his late 20s, his financial arrangements had begun to collapse. The men who had been keeping him were aging out. He began to use methamphetamine. He began to talk to friends about getting revenge on people who had abandoned him. And in the spring of 1997, he snapped. On April 27, 1997, he flew from San Diego to Minneapolis to confront two former friends, Jeffrey Trail, a Navy officer, and David Madsen, an architect. Madsen had been his lover. Trail had been his close friend. Quintanilla believed, correctly or not, that they had been together behind his back. In Madsen's apartment in downtown Minneapolis, Quintanilla beat Jeffrey Trail to death with a claw hammer. He rolled the body in a rug. He and Madsen left the apartment. 4 days later, Madsen's body was found on the shore of East Rush Lake, 50 miles north of the city, shot 3 times. Quintanilla drove Madsen's red Jeep Cherokee to Chicago. On May 4th, he entered the home of Lee Miglin, a 72-year-old real estate developer, tied him up in his garage, tortured him for several hours, and killed him by cutting his throat with pruning shears. He stole Miglin's green Lexus. He drove east. On May 9th, he killed William Reese, a 45-year-old cemetery caretaker in Pennsville, New Jersey, to take his red Chevy pickup truck. 4 men, 4 vehicles, each one traded like a chess piece. He drove to Miami Beach. He arrived in early May. He checked into the Dealey Plaza Hotel on Collins Avenue, a dilapidated 3-story building a few blocks north of the glamorous stretch of Ocean Drive. He paid in cash, weekly. He gave a false name. The owner of the hotel later said Quintanilla was, in her memory, unremarkable, a quiet young man who kept to himself. He left the hotel room mostly at night. He visited gay clubs. He ate at restaurants along the strip. He swam in the ocean. At one point, according to FBI reconstructions, he sat at a table at the News Cafe, Versace's favorite breakfast spot, and watched the designer eat. For 2 months, one of the most wanted men in America lived as a tourist in a city where his face was on flyers in every police precinct. The FBI has never given a satisfying explanation of how this was possible. Gianni Versace was born on December 2, 1946, in Reggio Calabria, on the tip of the Italian boot. His mother was a dressmaker. He grew up in her workshop, watching her cut patterns, learning the hand of the fabric before he could read. He moved to Milan in the 1970s, worked for other designers, and in 1978 founded his own label. By the 1990s, Versace was not simply a fashion house, but a cultural event. He dressed Princess Diana, Elton John, Madonna. He invented the supermodel era alongside his sister Donatella's marketing genius. He was 50 years old, at the height of his creative and financial power, when he decided to buy a mansion in Miami Beach. Casa Casuarina, the 3-story Mediterranean Revival building on Ocean Drive between 11th and 12th Streets, was originally built in 1930 by Alden Freeman as a replica of a house in Santo Domingo. Versace bought it in 1992 for $2.9 million. He spent $33 million more renovating it. It became, in the 90s, the most photographed private residence in America. On the morning of July 15, 1997, Versace left the house at around 8:30. He was alone. He walked south along Ocean Drive 2 blocks to the News Cafe. He bought 5 magazines: Vogue, New Yorker, Newsweek, People, and an Italian publication. He paid in cash. He walked back. He climbed the steps to the wrought iron gates of Casa Casuarina, the magazines under his arm. At that moment, Andrew Cunanan, who had been watching, stepped out from behind a parked car on the east side of the street. He walked up the steps. He was wearing a baseball cap, shorts, and a gray shirt. He raised a .40 caliber Taurus PT-100 semi-automatic pistol, the same weapon he had used to kill William Reese. He fired twice. Both shots entered Versace's head from behind. Versace collapsed on the steps. The magazines scattered. Cunanan turned and ran south. A team surrounded the vessel. They threw tear gas canisters through the windows. They stormed inside. They found Andrew Cunanan on the second floor, lying on a bed, a single bullet wound to the roof of his mouth from the same .40 caliber pistol. He was 27 years old. He had been dead, the coroner estimated, for only a few minutes before the team entered. He left no note. He left no manifesto. He left no explanation of why, of all the men he might have chosen, he chose Gianni Versace. There are theories that Versace and Cunanan had met briefly at an opera gala in San Francisco in 1990, that Cunanan believed himself to have once been Versace's lover, that the murder was a final symbolic act against a man who represented everything Cunanan had pretended to be. None of the theories have ever been confirmed. The people who could have confirmed them are all dead, by his hand or by his own. Versace's family scattered his ashes at Lake Como. Casa Casuarina was sold in 2009 for $41 million. It is now a boutique hotel called the Villa Casa Casuarina. Tourists pay to stay in the rooms where he lived. They eat breakfast at a table on the front terrace, a few feet from where he fell. The steps have been cleaned. The iron gates have been replaced twice. Nothing externally remembers. The irony of Gianni Versace's death is not that he was killed by a stranger. It is that he was killed by someone who might not have been a stranger, but whose connection to him died with the killer. A designer who spent his life making himself visible to the world was ended by a man whose entire life was an invention and whose last fiction was his own motive. Kevin Loibl flew from St. Petersburg to Orlando carrying 2 guns and a hunting knife. He boarded the flight on June 10, 2016. He checked the bag. The airport security scanners processed it normally. Nobody questioned it. In Florida, in 2016, you could fly domestically with a declared firearm in checked luggage, as long as the paperwork was filed correctly. Loibl had filed the paperwork correctly. He also had no criminal record. He had no history of mental health commitments. He had never made a threat that had reached law enforcement. On paper, Kevin Loibl was a 27-year-old man from St. Petersburg, Florida, who worked at a Best Buy, lived with his parents, and had no distinguishing features in any official file. The file only begins to exist. The file only becomes a file after the 7:03 p.m. of that evening, when he walked into the Plaza Live Theater on Bumby Avenue in Orlando, joined the end of a meet and greet line, waited for Christina Grimmie to finish signing for the fan in front of him, stepped forward as she opened her arms to hug him, and shot her 3 times at point-blank range. Christina Victoria Grimmie was born in Marlton, New Jersey on March 12, 1994. She was 22 years old on the night she died. She had begun posting videos of herself singing on YouTube when she was 14. Her bedroom, a small electric keyboard, covers of pop songs. By 1911, she had over 2 million subscribers. She signed with the manager Brian Teefy, who also managed Selena Gomez. She moved to Los Angeles. In 2014, she competed on the 6th season of The Voice, where she was mentored by Adam Levine and finished in 3rd place. She released her music independently. She toured. On June 10, 2016, she was opening for the band Before You Exit at the Plaza Live, a converted movie theater in a quiet residential section of Orlando. The show ended at around 10 p.m. She stayed afterward for the meet and greet, which was free for anyone who wanted to come. No security screening, no bag check. She sat at a table. Fans formed a line. Kevin Loibl had been watching Christina's YouTube videos for 3 years. The file on him, assembled in the weeks after the shooting from interviews with his family and examinations of his bedroom, describes a young man who had gradually built a romantic fantasy around her. He believed, his brother later told investigators, that the two of them had a spiritual connection, that she sang directly to him. He had, in the year before the murder, radically changed his appearance, lost 30 pounds, gotten hair transplants, had laser treatment on his teeth, begun using tanning beds. He told his roommate he was preparing himself to be worthy of her. He believed, when he finally met her, that she would recognize him, that she would see what he had done for her, that she would choose him. He drove from St. Petersburg to Orlando that afternoon, a 107-mile drive, in his own car. Not by plane. I was wrong about the flight. He drove. He parked near the Plaza Live. He entered the venue with the 2 9mm handguns in a backpack and the hunting knife in a sheath at his hip. No one checked. At the meet and greet, he stood in line for about 15 minutes. He watched her hug fans. He watched her pose for photographs. He watched her sign posters. When it was his turn, Christina looked up and smiled at him. She did what she had been doing all night. She opened her arms. She leaned forward to embrace him. He pulled the gun from his waistband and fired 4 times. 2 bullets struck her in the chest. 1 grazed her arm. The 4th went into the ceiling. She fell backward. Her brother Marcus, who had been standing a few feet away helping run the meet and greet, tackled Loibl to the ground. As they struggled, Loibl pulled out a second pistol and shot himself once in the head. He was dead before the police arrived. Christina Grimmie was transported to Orlando Regional Medical Center. She was pronounced dead at 10:30 p.m. She was 22 years old. Her brother, still covered in her blood, called their mother from the hospital. The next night, 12 hours after Christina's death, a different gunman walked into the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, less than 4 miles from the Plaza Live, and killed 49 people. For 72 hours, Christina Grimmie's murder shared the front pages with the deadliest mass shooting in American history to that date. The city could not absorb both at once. One buried the other. Her funeral in Medford, New Jersey, was attended by her family, by Adam Levine, by the community that had watched her grow up singing. Adam Levine paid for the funeral. The file on Kevin Loibl contains no letters, no journal, no manifesto. His parents, in interviews with investigators, said they had known he was obsessed with a singer, but did not know which one. They had thought it was a phase. They had seen him lose weight. They had thought he was getting healthier. The bedroom search revealed hundreds of hours of her YouTube videos downloaded onto his computer. Printed photographs of her. A playlist titled simply, Her. There was no evidence he had ever contacted her. No letters sent. No messages posted publicly. He was invisible to the authorities, invisible to her team, invisible to the venue. He walked in with the line. He was, statistically, indistinguishable from the fans around him. The irony of Christina Grimmie's death is that she opened her arms. She thought he was there to hug her. For 3 years, she had built her career on closeness to her fans, on replying to them, on posting from her bedroom as if they were all in the room with her. That closeness was the product. That closeness was the path he walked to reach her. She died in the posture of welcome. Lee Harvey Oswald wrote to the Soviet embassy 2 months before Dallas. The letter, dated November 9, 1963, is in the National Archives. I have seen the photograph of it, a single handwritten page, the script small and neat, asking for help in securing a visa to return to the Soviet Union for himself and his wife, Marina. The letter contains no mention of the president. It mentions a trip to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City in early October. It mentions that his Mexican visit was aborted. It complains about the FBI visiting him in Dallas. And it was, when it arrived in Washington, intercepted and photographed by the FBI, then forwarded to the Soviet embassy without comment. The FBI had a file on Lee Harvey Oswald that ran to hundreds of pages. The CIA had a file. The State Department had a file. The Office of Naval Intelligence, the Dallas Police, the Immigration Service, all had files. On November 22, 1963, at 12:30 in the afternoon, the man who had generated all these files fired 3 shots from the 6th floor southeast window of the Texas School Book Depository into the open presidential limousine moving along Elm Street in Dealey Plaza. The second shot, and the third, killed John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, 46 years old, father of 2, in the arms of his wife, in front of his country, on live film that has been studied frame by frame for more than 60 years. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in New Orleans on October 18, 1939, 2 months after his father died of a heart attack. His mother, Marguerite, was left with 3 boys to raise on little money. She moved the family constantly: New Orleans, Fort Worth, Dallas, New York City, back to New Orleans. Lee attended 12 different schools by the time he was 17. He was a quiet child, bookish, often described by teachers as intelligent but withdrawn. In New York, at 13, he was evaluated by a court psychiatrist named Renatus Hartogs after being truant from school. Hartogs diagnosed him as a personality disorder with schizoid features. He recommended long-term treatment. He was never treated. He went back to Texas. At 16, he began reading Marxist literature from the New Orleans Public Library. At 17, in 1956, he joined the United States Marine Corps. In the Marines, he was trained as a radar operator. He served in Japan at Atsugi Air Base, which was, though Oswald would not have been told this, a major CIA operations center for U-2 spy plane missions over the Soviet Union. He scored above average in rifle marksmanship, qualifying as a sharpshooter in 1956, and later, in 1959, as a marksman, the lower of the 2 scores, but still a trained rifleman. His fellow Marines nicknamed him Oswaldskevich for openly reading Russian-language textbooks in the barracks. He studied Russian. He told people he intended to go to the Soviet Union. He was considered odd, but not dangerous. In September of 1959, he received a hardship discharge to care for his mother, who had injured her foot. He stayed home for 3 days. Then he boarded a ship to Europe. Within a month, he was in Moscow, applying for Soviet citizenship. The Soviets did not initially want him. He attempted suicide in a Moscow hotel when his visa was about to expire. He slashed his left wrist in a bathtub. The act was, the Warren Commission later determined, most likely theatrical, a way to force the Soviet government to take responsibility for him. It worked. He was transferred to a hospital, then granted residency, then sent to the Belarusian city of Minsk. He was given an apartment. He was given a job at a radio factory. He was given a stipend that made him, by Soviet standards, comfortable. He married, in 1961, a 19-year-old pharmacology student named Marina Prusakova. They had a daughter. He grew bored. Minsk, for a young American who had expected revolutionary paradise, was a factory town. In June of 1962, the Oswalds, with American help, returned to the United States. They settled in Fort Worth. The next 17 months are, in the file, a chaos of small failures. He could not hold a job. He was violent toward Marina. He moved her and the baby from apartment to apartment. He was interviewed by the FBI twice in 1962. Routine interviews about his time in the USSR. He was angry about these interviews. In March of 1963, using a mail order form, he purchased a 6.5mm Carcano bolt-action rifle from a mail-order house in Chicago for $21.45, shipped to a P.O. box in Dallas under the alias A. Heidel. On April 10, 1963, he fired that rifle at Major General Edwin Walker, a right-wing retired Army officer, through the window of Walker's Dallas home. The bullet struck the window frame and shattered. Walker was not injured. Oswald escaped. The attack was not connected to him until after the Kennedy assassination. when Marina confessed that her husband had come home that night and told her what he had done. In the summer of 1963, he moved alone to New Orleans. He got a job at a coffee company. He was fired. He founded a one-man chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and handed out leaflets on Canal Street. He was arrested for disturbing the peace when a confrontation broke out with anti-Castro Cubans. He gave a radio interview. He went on television. In September, he traveled by bus to Mexico City and attempted to obtain visas, both to Cuba and to the Soviet Union, at their respective embassies. Both rejected him. He was told, in Mexico City, that his applications would take months. He returned to Dallas frustrated, humiliated, deeper in the conviction that the major powers of the 20th century were against him personally. In October, he took a job at the Texas School Book Depository, a 7-story brick warehouse on the northwest corner of Elm and Houston Streets in Dealey Plaza. He earned $1.25 an hour filling book orders. He lived during the week in a rooming house on North Beckley Avenue in Oak Cliff, renting a room for $8 a week under the name O.H. Lee. Marina and the baby, now joined by a second infant daughter, lived with a friend in Irving, Texas. He visited them on weekends. On Thursday, November 21st, 1963, he came to Irving a day early. He picked up from the garage, where he had stored it, his Carcano rifle, disassembled, wrapped in brown paper. He told his coworker, Buell Wesley Frazier, who drove him back to Dallas the next morning, that the package contained curtain rods. The presidential motorcade's route through Dallas had been published in both Dallas newspapers on November 19th and 20th. The route passed directly beneath the southeast windows of the Texas School Book Depository. Oswald carried the brown paper package into the building at around 7:50 a.m. on November 22nd. He went up to the 6th floor. He spent the morning filling book orders with his coworkers. At lunchtime, most of the employees left the building or went to the first floor lunchroom. Oswald stayed on the 6th floor. He built a low wall of book boxes around the southeast corner window, a small sniper's nest. He loaded 4 cartridges into the Carcano. He waited. The limousine entered Dealey Plaza from Main Street, turned right onto Houston, then made the sharp left onto Elm that would carry it past the depository and down toward the Stemmons Freeway. At the moment of the turn, the vehicle was moving at approximately 11 miles per hour. It was 175 feet away from Oswald's window. At 12:30 p.m., he fired the first shot. The Warren Commission concluded it missed. Some witnesses in the crowd said they thought a firecracker had gone off. The second shot struck Kennedy in the upper back, exited his throat, and continued into Texas Governor John Connally, wounding him severely. Kennedy raised his hands toward his throat. Jacqueline Kennedy, beside him, turned to look at her husband. The car did not stop. It did not even slow significantly. In the 6.5 seconds that followed, Oswald worked the bolt of his rifle, chambered a third round, and fired again. This shot struck the president in the back of the head. The film made by the Dallas dressmaker Abraham Zapruder, standing on a concrete pedestal 30 feet from the car, captured this moment. Frame 313. The limousine accelerated. It raced down Stemmons Freeway to Parkland Memorial Hospital. John Kennedy was wheeled into Trauma Room 1 at 12:38 p.m. The attending physicians attempted resuscitation, but the wound was unsurvivable. He was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. A Catholic priest performed last rites. Jacqueline Kennedy, still wearing the Palace police officer J.D. Tippett, patrolling Oak Cliff alone, pulled alongside him to ask questions. Oswald drew the revolver and shot Tippett 4 times, killing him. Witnesses saw the shooting. They gave descriptions. 40 minutes later, at 1:50 p.m., police arrested Oswald inside the Texas Theater on Jefferson Boulevard, where he had ducked without paying for a ticket. He drew the revolver on the arresting officers. It misfired. He shouted, "This is it," as he was wrestled to the floor. He was charged with the murder of Officer Tippett that evening. Near midnight, he was charged with the murder of the president. He was interrogated for more than 12 hours over the next 2 days. He denied everything. He said he was a patsy. He requested a lawyer named John Apt, a civil rights attorney in New York who had represented communists before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Apt, contacted by Oswald's brother, declined. No other lawyer was retained in time. On Sunday morning, November 24th, at approximately 11:21 a.m., Lee Harvey Oswald was being transferred from the Dallas Police Headquarters to the county jail. He walked through the basement parking garage in handcuffs, flanked by detectives, under the eyes of dozens of reporters and live television cameras. A man in a gray suit and fedora stepped out of the press crowd, walked up to him, and shot him once in the stomach from 2 feet away. The shooter was a Dallas nightclub owner named Jack Ruby. He had walked into the basement 20 minutes earlier by mistake. Nobody still knows how. Oswald was transported to Parkland Memorial Hospital, to the same emergency room where the president had died 47 hours earlier. He was pronounced dead at 1:07 p.m. He was 24 years old. He had never been convicted of any crime. He had never stood trial. He was, when the bullet entered him, still legally presumed innocent. The Warren Commission, appointed by President Johnson a week after the assassination, concluded in 1964 that Oswald had acted alone. The House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1979 concluded that there had probably been a conspiracy, though it named no conspirators. The CIA records pertaining to the case remained partially classified until 2022. Some are still sealed. More than 2,000 books have been written about what happened in Dealey Plaza in 6.5 seconds on November 22, 1963. The grassy knoll, the second shooter, the Cuban connection, the Soviet connection, the Mafia connection, the motorcade route, the magic bullet. Every theory has its defenders. Every theory has its evidence. None of the theories, so far, has been proven. What is proven is that the files were there. The FBI had been told Oswald was in Dallas. The Secret Service had not been informed. The Soviet embassy letter had been intercepted. The trip to Mexico City had been photographed. The Walker shooting had anyone drawn the connection, been the rehearsal. A man who generated files from the time he was 13 years old walked into a building owned by a company that filled textbook orders, carrying a rifle he had ordered through the mail for $21. He waited by a window. The President of the United States drove beneath him at 11 miles an hour. The irony of John Kennedy's death is not that it has never been solved. It has been solved, on the paper of the files, in the mechanics of what physically happened. The irony is that the stalker was killed on live television before he could be tried. An entire country watched, at the same instant, both the murder of its president and the murder of the man accused of murdering its president. It is the founding wound of modern American distrust. Every conspiracy theory about every subsequent assassination, every presumption that the official story is incomplete, every suspicion that the powerful know things the public is not told, all of it traces back to a basement in Dallas and the 47 hours that separated 2 deaths in the same emergency room. The warnings were there. The files were there. No one drew the line between them in time. The youngest elected president in American history rode through a plaza in an open car at 11 miles an hour, and a man with a file thicker than most criminal cases aimed out of a warehouse window and made history the way obsessed strangers always have. From a distance, from the dark. While no one was looking at the person who had been watching all along. 6 names you knew. 6 strangers you never heard of until it was too late. A man who wanted to be somebody. A 19-year-old with a bus ticket and a paperback. A fan club president. A fugitive in a baseball cap. A Best Buy employee who lost 30 pounds. A radar operator with a rifle. Each one, in the months and years before the killing, had left a trail. Letters, hospitalizations, restraining orders asked for and not granted, studio security reports that were filed and never shared, embezzlement confronted and then forgiven, FBI interviews that generated paper and no action. The warnings were always there. the warnings were always there. And in every single case, someone, somewhere, in a file cabinet or a hotel room or a bedroom wallpapered with magazine covers, had stopped being a fan and become a shadow. And nobody, in time, turned around to look. Blackwell read the notebooks. Blackwell read the letters. Blackwell walked the floors where they fell. The files are still here. The files are still here, and somewhere, right now, someone else is writing the next one.